Presenting the PR Maven podcast, hosted by Nancy Marshall, the PR Maven, targeted at business leaders who want to merge the best techniques of traditional networking with the best new platforms and technologies to engage your target audience, build your network, and grow your brand and business. The podcast is sponsored by Marshall Communications, Maine-based, globally connected. As we get ready for another great episode, remember, you can always connect with Nancy and other listeners on the PR Maven Nation group page on Facebook. Now, here's your host, Nancy Marshall.
Gary Arndt is an award-winning blogger and travel photographer who has been traveling around the world since 2007. His travels have taken him to 200 countries and territories in the Travelers Century Club and 228 United Nations countries. He has also visited over 380 UNESCO World Heritage sites and all 50 U.S. states. Gary's blog, Everything Everywhere, is considered one of the best travel blogs in the world. It was named one of the top 25 blogs in the world by Time magazine, and it earned a gold medal in the travel blog category in the North American Travel Journalists Association, NATJA, Awards, and a gold medal for Best Travel Photography Blog in the 2018 TSCA's Awards. He is one of the most awarded travel photographers of this decade. Since 2009, he has been the co-host of This Week in Travel, an award-winning weekly podcast which covers travel industry news. He is also the host of the Well-Traveled Life podcast. He is also an associate producer and senior travel correspondent for On Travel on the American Forces Radio Network. Gary is also an accomplished public speaker and has spoken on topics related to travel and new media on 6 continents. I am really glad that I had this chance to talk to Gary because my team at Marshall Communications has been working with him on his itineraries for visiting the state of Maine. So, Gary, to kick things off, tell us about your career and how you got into it in the first place.
I had kind of an odd start. So I started one of the very early internet companies back in 1994. I had a college roommate at the time I was living with, and he developed a software product called Cold Fusion, which is still around. It's actually owned by Adobe now, to help hook up databases to the internet. And as he was doing this, he had some companies that came to him that wanted to have their corporate websites done this way, but he didn't want to actually do that work. So he asked me if I wanted to do it. So I said, sure. And one thing led to another. I had a friend that I brought on to help. And fast forward 4 years later, I'm 28 years old. I have a company with 50 employees, and I sold it to a larger international consulting firm, and started a couple other companies. And eventually I kind of got bored, and I hatched the idea of traveling around the world. And so I sold my home in 2007, and I thought I would travel around the world for 1 year. And it kind of just became 10 years. And I just sort of never stopped. And along the way, I started a website because I'd always done internet stuff. So I started this website to kind of document my travels and to let the people back home, my friends and family, know what I was doing. And it kind of just became popular because at the time, nobody was really doing, or I should say there were very few people doing what I was doing. And I developed a following. People started following the website, and also helped that the first places I visited were really kind of obscure places in the Pacific Ocean, a lot of the island countries. And people were very curious about that. And then in 2010, Time magazine named it one of the top 25 blogs in the world, not travel blogs, just blogs in general. And things have just kind of gone from there. And it's I now have a pretty large online following, and it's what I do for a living.
Well, good for you. You're definitely pursuing your passion. I admire you for that. That's awesome. If you had it to do over again, would you do anything differently, Gary?
With the hindsight of knowing how everything kind of worked out, probably maybe I would have gotten on Instagram a little sooner. I would have probably developed an email list a bit earlier, things like that. Maybe put a bit more emphasis on SEO earlier on. But, for the most part, it's worked out pretty well.
So you have an email list. Do you do an email newsletter?
Yeah. And that's one of the things, one of the reasons I actually stopped traveling full time is because I found it was really difficult to work while I was traveling. And So I have over 20,000 people that are on my email newsletter right now. And I send it out occasionally, but I'm in the middle of kind of revamping the whole thing. So it'll be a much more frequent affair and kind of provide a bit more, I don't know, cohesiveness to the whole thing.
Well, it's funny you mention that because, as you know, I have a PR agency, Nancy Marshall Communications, that works with travel writers, and you're one of the travel writers we've been working with. And I think commonly people think it's just the life of Riley to be a travel writer. Like, you just travel around, but, you don't really have any quote unquote work to do. But actually, it's a ton of work. I mean, for every trip, you have to do your stories and documentation, and it's a lot of work, right? So that's what you're doing now when you come home.
Oh, it's not just that. Because I have to be everything. So if you think of all the different hats people wear at a publication, you have a writer and an editor, but then you have someone that handles, say, their sales department for advertising. You have somebody that deals with circulation. You have somebody that deals with the layout and the publishing. So you have all these other people behind the scenes that are part of what's required for a print publication. And when you run a website, you kind of have to do everything. So it isn't just writing the stories. It's all the technical stuff, all the business stuff kind of needs to be done by you as well.
Yeah, so you don't have a big staff or any staff for that matter.
I have some part-time people, and they're kind of scattered all over the world. I have an editor that I just brought on board. She lives in Barcelona. I've had writers work for me from the Philippines. I've had technical people work from me in different parts of the United States. So I do, but it's not like a full-time staff that are working exclusively for me.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's good. I mean, that's the way a lot of companies are operating these days, is virtually and using contract labor as needed. So I think it makes a lot of sense. So, Gary, can you give me an example of how PR and social media have helped to advance you personally, your organization, or a client?
Well, for me, I mean, social media has been kind of the core of everything I've done. If it wasn't for social media, what I do just couldn't exist. It allows me to reach out and contact my readers, without any middleman, without any interference. And I was very early on board with this. So I was a really early user and exploiter of like Twitter and Facebook, podcasting, even my website. So it's something that is what I do simply isn't possible without it.
Well, and you got on the bandwagon early, which was a good thing.
It was, but there's a lot of newer people that have come on board, and they found a great deal of success by doing things differently than from what I'm doing it. If you go and look at my Instagram account, you will not find a single photo of myself. When I started, I was a travel photographer. I took pictures of the places I visited. And now if you look at a lot of people, every photo is of themselves, right? They're wearing a sundress or a floppy hat or wistfully holding a cup of coffee. And it's really become more about them than it is about the place they're visiting. But, they're finding a great deal of success in it.
Are you referring to influencers, Gary?
Oh, yeah. Flat out.
Yeah. Well, they have mastered the art of the selfie, which is something that I have a 26-year-old son, and he criticizes every selfie I put online. He's like, Mom, you got to learn how to do selfies better. So I guess that's part of being an influencer is being good at selfies.
Yeah, it's a really odd thing because, in the 12 years I've been traveling, and I've been to over 200 countries and territories, I don't think I've taken more than 10 photos of myself in 12 years. And it's never something I think about or have any desire to do.
Well, maybe someday you'll do that, or you'll have a photographer following you around and documenting your travels. So, Gary, I know that PR, marketing, and certainly social media have changed drastically over the course of my own career. What techniques are you using now that you were not using when you started out?
Everything. It's changed so much. When I started, my website was my social media. The type of things I was writing were kind of diary style entries. Oh, here's what I saw today. Here are my random thoughts about a place. Because there wasn't really, Facebook was still something that you needed an invitation to join. Twitter was still growing. Instagram, these things didn't exist. So that was my social media. And people would literally go to the website every day to read what you were doing. And that's not the case anymore. Now, if I write an article, I'll get more comments on Facebook than I will on my website about the article on my website. One of the things that I'm noticing is changing now is I think we've reached peak social media, which is not to say it's dead or dying necessarily, but I don't think it's going to get any bigger. And I think there's the startings of a big backlash against social media. And what I'm seeing is a lot of people are moving back to their website as the primary thing they're focusing on because it's the thing that they can control and they own. You could wake up one morning and Instagram could delete your account. And I've heard many stories of this happening where without any reason given, without any notice, you just lose everything you have. And by focusing on the things that you own, which are primarily going to be your website and an email list, you don't run into that problem.
Well, they do say that your email list is one of the most valuable assets that any marketing department could have because, as you said, you do own those assets.
Oh, I agree. And, one of the funny things being on the other side of it from PR is that in 12 years of doing this, and I'd say maybe 9 or 8 years of working with PR firms, no one has ever asked me about my email list. They will want to know how many Instagram followers I have or, social media followers, or they'll ask how much traffic my website gets. But no one has ever asked me about my email list. And I did a session at the New York Times Travel Show this year and about, online media. And I said there are two really underexploited areas, especially in travel media, that no one is taking advantage of. And that is podcasting and email. And they sound boring and they've been around forever, but they work. And everyone is so fixated on the new shiny thing, which is, Instagram, because they can see the numbers publicly. And that's the reason I think podcasting and email don't get the same attention. It's not that they're not powerful. They're extremely powerful, but there's not a big gaudy number that's public that you can look at.
Well, that's very interesting, actually. And I do think that having a big email list is valuable, and obviously using it, using it in an intelligent way is important too, and offering up really helpful information so that people want to stay subscribed and not unsubscribe. So is that what you try to do with your email newsletter, is offer helpful information for people traveling?
Yeah. So one of the things that I'm going to be launching very soon is an autoresponder series. And it's going to be a pretty lengthy one that sort of, every few days you're going to get something that kind of summarizes part of my journey of the last 12 years. So I'm going to start by just explaining what prompted this desire to travel around the world, and then, kind of do a synopsis for different regions of the world that people may or may not be familiar with, as well as my quest to visit national parks, UNESCO World Heritage sites, travel photography, things like that. At the end of the day, I think, for travel, you do have to be useful. Armchair travel is interesting only to a point. And at the end of the day, people want information because they want to go somewhere.
Oh, totally. I think that useful travel information and information that's served up in such a way that people can act on it is really helpful. I think it's interesting how times have changed, though. Like magazines like AAA, that in print, people rip stories out and file them in like file folders for future trips. Do you find that people save your email newsletters for future trips in some fashion so they can access it when they're going there?
Usually, they may, if just archive it or something. I mean, with email, it's pretty trivial to do that. You just, hit archive. But a lot of times when people are doing research for a trip, they're just going to go to Google. And that is another area where I think for PR professionals, they need to look at where an article is probably going to rank, for what someone writes. And there's a huge, that's one of the other areas that things are changing as well. Bloggers, people who are independently owning their own websites, are publishing less, but better. So they're publishing fewer articles, but longer, more in-depth pieces that tend to rank better. Whereas if a website like Travel and Leisure or Condé Nast Traveler are still writing the 800 word pieces that they've been writing kind of forever. And what a lot of bloggers are finding is they can pretty much beat any big publication in terms of search results if they just put their mind to it. And it's really not that hard. And that's kind of what a lot of them are doing.
Well, I do think that that's a part of a PR professional's job, is to be able to rank the authority ranking of any given travel writer so that, they can know whether or not they actually are influencing a targeted audience or not. So I think the fact that you keep producing content and you're engaging with your audience and that you have your own list, I think that's really valuable.
Yeah, it really is. And I've always said, the true measure of influence is the number of people that will want to buy you a drink. Now, unfortunately, that's not a metric you can track, but that's the case. And you can have all the traffic in the world and all the numbers, but at the end of the day, if people aren't personally invested in you, I'm not entirely certain if they're going to truly be able to influence or motivate people to do anything.
Yeah. I've never heard that as a measure of influence, but that's really a good one. I like that. So, Gary, what are some of the obstacles to success in your career, and how have you overcome those obstacles?
The biggest thing when I started out, because I've been doing this so long, is that when I started, the term blogger was really looked down upon, especially by people that had been in the traditional media for a long time. The norm, there was kind of a pecking order or a totem pole. Like you start out your career at a small newspaper, and then maybe you get a job at a bigger newspaper, and you keep working your way up. Maybe you'll work at a big city newspaper or a big magazine or something, and you get to be an editor, and that's kind of the top of the chain. And what I did, it's not that it was low on the totem pole. It wasn't even on the totem pole at all. And so it didn't really earn anyone's respect. And the way to overcome it was basically to just wait everyone out, as kind of a lot of the publications died. And now you fast forward to 2019, the highest, income earners in travel media right now are bloggers. Every time I go to another blogging event, I'm shocked at the number of people that are making full-time incomes. Whereas in like SATW, the vast majority of active freelancers are making less than $20,000 a year. And this is where all the money is. It's in owning, the farm, not being a sharecropper. You have to own your own publication and all the rights to it.
That's a very interesting way to put it. I like that. So owning the farm rather than being a sharecropper.
I don't mean to use it necessarily in a pejorative sense, but in a very real economic way, that is what freelancing is. Right? Someone else owns the publication. They're making the majority of the money on it. And I've gone through this exercise at various conferences I've spoken at, where you look at the amount of money that a top tier magazine, a travel magazine like Travel and Leisure, National Geographic Traveler, pick the one, doesn't matter. If you look at how much revenue they were making, and then you look at the amount of money that actually went to the writers and the photographers, it's usually less than 5%. Now, to be sure, there's a lot that goes into making a high-end print publication. There's shipping, there's printing, there's paper, there's a whole team of people that are involved in putting that out. But the actual stuff that makes up the publication is only a tiny fraction of where the money goes.
Oh, yeah. And then the marketing of the publication, too. We didn't mention that. That's
right.
Expensive, isn't it?
Yeah. And, a lot of people in the print business, we're concerned. It's like, well, why would I give up? We're making all our money in print advertising. Why would I shift to digital? And they called it, going from dollars to dimes. And that was true. As it turns out, there's a lot less revenue to be made online. But the cost infrastructure is going from dollars to pennies. And you can, just as a general rule of thumb, you're going to spend about $1 to get a high-end glossy magazine to a reader. If you factor in the cost of printing, the cost of paper, and the cost of mailing. Whereas I can reach, so if you have a circulation of say 100,000 people, that's at least going to be $100,000 per month to get, a monthly publication out. Whereas a site like mine, I can reach 250,000 people for $150. And so that's, the internet was never about making money. It's about reducing cost. And the people that are being successful are the ones that are exploiting it by having a super low cost business.
Well, and I think also the ability to update information and keep it relevant, and change and edit on the fly. Obviously, that's a lot better for travel than a print publication, which takes a long time to put out. And sometimes by the time the publication comes out, the information is outdated.
Yeah. When I talk to a lot of people, especially freelancers that are moving over into online, I tell them you can't think of an article as, it used to be you wrote it, you submitted it to the editor, and then you were done, right? You'd send them an invoice and then they published it and you just forgot about it. They need to think of an article now as a living document. So you can go back months or years later, and as the situation changes, you can update that article. So it's never really done. I have a lot of different guides to different places I've been, and periodically I have to go back if, things are changed. They may close, they may open a new visitor center, or, whatever, operating hours change. And you have to think of it in those terms.
Well, I think I think the internet and travel are really good companions, so to speak. So I think you're using them really well, and it's great to hear your business model. So Gary, how do you measure success in your PR, social media, and marketing?
To the extent that it's a business, at the end of the day, I think you ultimately have to measure it in terms of revenue. Just having a lot of vanity numbers and vanity metrics is great, but I don't know if that's necessarily going to move the ball forward for you at all. So for me, it's usually going to be in terms of visits to the website, podcast downloads, things like that. And those all correspond to something which has some sort of direct revenue component.
Oh, I was going to ask you, how do you monetize your podcast?
Well, one of the podcasts, This Week in Travel, that I do, we've been doing it now for 10 years. And in 10 years, we have made exactly $0.00 on the podcast. And when you factor in the money we've spent hosting it and doing other things for it, we've lost money on it. But it's been very successful in terms of opening a lot of doors for us. So we've gotten, Pauline Fromer, Samantha Brown, a lot of people on the show. It's allowed us to get connections within the travel industry, and it's been very successful for us in those terms. And it's something we all enjoy doing. We don't put a lot of production into it, so we hit record and we just start going until we're done. So it's very easy for us to do. And we started in 2009, 2019. We're still doing it.
Well, congratulations on that, because I think I've heard the statistic that most people give up on a podcast after about 7 episodes. Is that true?
Yeah, it's not surprising. It takes a fair amount of work, and it takes a while to really build up an audience, I think. And a lot of people don't stick with it.
Well, that leads perfectly into the next question, which is that most people who are successful in their careers have a network of fans and followers, either online or in person or both. How have you built your network of fans and followers, and has it been a conscious goal or has it happened on its own?
I think I built it by getting out there and traveling. And that's the biggest difference, I think, between, say, someone like myself and a travel writer. I'm a traveler first and a writer second. A lot of travel writers I know, they may write about other niches. They may have done something else and then they kind of got into travel. Whereas for myself, I'm a traveler first, and it was the travel that got me into travel journalism. And I think that having been there and done that and spent so much time on the road and taking the time to answer, all the email questions I get, I run a real popular Facebook group for travel where I always step in and answer people's questions. That's kind of how you do it. And, it's kind of a cliche, but it really is sort of one person at a time.
Sounds like you do have quite a network between your email list and your Facebook group and all of your other social platforms. So how has your network helped you to advance your career?
Kind of like with social media, that's kind of the whole basis of what I do. Without the people that, follow me and support me, I don't really have much of anything. And a lot of these people, if I host a tour or something, I've had people that have signed up for multiple years to travel with me, taken photography courses from me, things like that. So it's a huge component of what I do. The whole thing about social media is people tend to focus on the media and they forget the social aspect of it. And that social aspect of really talking to people and helping them and answering their questions is extremely important.
I do think that's a good reminder that the word social is in social media, and social means kind of interacting. It's not one-sided. It's a two-way street.
Absolutely.
So, Gary, in your line of work, what is a resource such as a book, a website, or an app that you have found helpful, and why?
There isn't any. Things change so much in this business that I don't think you can rely on any just one thing. So what I do is I have about 100 websites in an RSS reader, and I follow those websites, and I spend about an hour every day in the morning just keeping abreast of things to understand what is happening in terms of SEO, in terms of social media. And a lot of people that I follow, they may not write frequently, but when they do, they have something really profound to say. And hopefully there's a nugget or two that you can get from that. And that's kind of how you have to stay abreast of things. It's not something that you can rely on one source. And I do think you really have to have your ear to the ground and pay attention to kind of what's happening with various trends on all the different platforms.
I love the idea of starting the day by reading for an hour. I think that's really great. Do you do your email first, or do you wait until after you've done your reading before you do your email?
I usually look at my email inbox to see if there's anything vital that occurred while I was sleeping. But other than that, I usually go to the RSS reader first. And a lot of the most efficient and successful people I know, RSS kind of fell out of popularity, but a lot of people I know still use that, and it's still the most efficient way to be able to follow a large number of websites. A lot of the websites I follow, I don't necessarily read everything they publish, but I certainly at least am able to look at the headline. And then maybe, 10% of those every day, I'll drill down and actually read the article. And I also follow a lot of travel blogs for precisely that reason, because I want to know what everyone else is doing. I want to know what destinations they're covering, what kind of articles they're writing. And if you're a PR person in the travel industry, I think everybody should be doing that. I think you should get a list of the top 100 travel blogs, put them in an RSS reader, and just, see what they're publishing, even if it's only the headlines, to see what's kind of happening right now. That is the best way to kind of figure out what's happening in the industry.
I have to confess, it's been a long time since I've heard anyone talk about RSS. What does that stand for again? Real something syndication?
Real simple syndication. Technically, I don't know if it actually means anything, but I think real simple syndication is what it was used for. And it's a technology that dates back about 20 years. And ever since Google killed off Google Reader, it kind of has lost popularity, but there's always been this core group that has always used it. And pretty much every website has an RSS feed you can subscribe to. So it's just such a powerful tool. And I know a lot of journalists use it as well for subscribe. If you need a lot of websites you have to follow, rather than relying on something like Facebook and some algorithmic feed, which may or may not show you something you need to see.
Well, I think that's very good advice. So maybe that falls right into my next question, which is, what would be your one piece of advice for someone starting out in their career?
For someone who wants to do what I do, the advice I always give is start your website today. Like, don't worry, don't try to make it perfect. A website is not a restaurant. You don't need to get everything perfect for your grand opening. You just need to have it up and running. You're going to change it anyhow. And then it's going to take time. Don't expect necessarily to be making a full-time income off this after a year. It may take several years, especially because it's gotten very crowded and very competitive.
Yes, it certainly has. And you need, as you said, I think the one thing that you bring with you is your audience. And that is a competitive advantage to have a strong and engaged audience.
Absolutely. And that takes time. You just don't get that overnight.
It's true. It's absolutely true. Gary, what is the one parting thought you'd like to share with our audience today?
I think there's been a lot of changes in travel media over the last 10 years. After the 2008 recession, we've seen a lot of cutbacks in terms of travel sections of newspapers. Travel magazines have either gone out of business or they have shrunk dramatically, cutting back in the number of issues, cutting the size of the issue down. And that's a trend that's going to keep increasing. At some point, I think most of the major print publications are just going to disappear. And what we're going to be left with is online. And I know there's a lot of cachet in having, an article in the, Travel and Leisure, the New York Times. It's something you can print out and put in a frame and put over, the introduction, the lobby of a hotel or something. But at the end of the day, I think things are really moving online, and the more you can orientate your business towards that, the better off you're going to be right now and going forward into the future.
Well, yes, thank you for that good advice, Gary, because I know that Google does look at your longevity when they're evaluating your level of influence, right? They like to see that someone's been engaged for a long time.
Yeah, I actually created, this might be of interest to some of your listeners, I created a list of the top 1,300 travel blogs in the world. And it's on my website, and I update it frequently. And so I rank them in terms of domain authority. So I have 4 different metrics that I track. And then I also have the age of the domain. And one of the things you'll notice is that all of the top sites have been around for at least a decade, if not longer.
Wow.
And because, again, it takes time to build up that authority.
So why don't you give us your web address if people want to look at that list? And we'll have it in the show notes as well.
It's on my website. It's everything-everywhere.com. And down in the footer, you'll see a link for top travel blogs. Just click on that. And you can view the list online, or you can download it as a PDF if you want, all 1,300 websites. You can export it as an Excel spreadsheet, do whatever you want to do with it. I update it periodically. I add several new sites to the list every week. And it's a really good resource if you want to see kind of who's who in travel blogging.
I love that. I'm going to definitely check that out myself. So that's everything-everywhere.com?
Correct.
All right, good. Well, thanks for sharing that. And my final question is to PR Maven, for those who want to connect with you, how would they do that? What's the best way?
Oh, just go to my website. I have an email address. You can contact me there. It's just Gary@everything-everywhere.com. I'll probably answer that right away. Whereas if you try to contact me on social media, it'll probably take a little bit longer.
And I should mention, because my PR agency works with the state of Maine, Gary has recently been traveling in Maine. So I assume you're going to have some information about Maine's national parks and monuments on the site soon.
I will. I just got back on Friday, a few days ago, and just got all my photos up today, and I'll be writing all that stuff shortly.
Well, that's great, Gary. Thank you so much for being my guest today. I know that my team at Marshall Communications recommended you because they thought that you would be so full of great information and so engaging, and I definitely found you to be that way. So thanks for joining me, and I know PR Maven Nation is going to enjoy it as well.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the PR Maven podcast. For show notes, links, and guest contact information, visit prmaven.com. If you'd like to connect with Nancy and the rest of PR Maven Nation, be sure to find our group on Facebook. We encourage you to subscribe to the podcast and share our content to bring on great guests with more information. Plus, you can also connect with your target audience, build your network, and build your brand.